Picture this. It's 6 a.m. The desert sun isn't even fully up yet, and there is a police officer standing on my welcome mat, hand resting ominously near his belt, while I'm standing there in a ratty bathrobe, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, wondering if Barbara, the neighborhood tyrant, has finally managed to swat me. The morning air in Tucson is crisp, biting at my exposed ankles, but the real chill comes from looking past the officer's shoulder and seeing her, Barbara Miller, standing by her manicured rosebushes, sipping coffee from a mug that probably costs more than my car, watching the scene unfold with the sick, twisted satisfaction of a spectator at a gladiator match. That look on her face, that smug, self-righteous smirk, told me everything I needed to know, because after 2 years of psychological warfare and a fabricated fine of $4,200 designed specifically to bankrupt us, she thought this was the season finale, the moment she'd watched the disabled vet get hauled away in cuffs. But then my wife, Sarah, steps out from behind me, clutching her leather portfolio like a shield, and the atmosphere instantly changes, shifting from fear to something electric, something dangerous, and for a split second, the confidence on Barbara's face falters, because she has absolutely no clue that she is about to learn the most expensive, humiliating lesson of her entire miserable life. Let me rewind the tape a bit and explain how we ended up in this suburban nightmare, because Barbara Miller didn't just decide to ruin my life on a whim. No, this woman had spent a decade perfecting the art of HOA terrorism. My name is Lucas, I'm 45, a former Marine with a Purple Heart, a bad back, and the kind of 1,000-yard stare you get from dealing with bureaucracy, while my wife, Sarah, is the quiet intellectual type, always buried in books, disappearing for long, work meetings she never really talks about, the kind of woman who values privacy over everything. We moved to Oak Creek Sanctuary looking for peace, seeking a place where we could grow old and I could manage my PTSD in silence. But instead of paradise, we walked straight into a dictatorship run by a 52-year-old failed real estate agent who treats the neighborhood covenants like religious scripture. Barbara runs this place like a prison warden in designer heels, clicking down the street at dawn every single day, armed with a literal tape measure and a clipboard, hunting for infractions like a shark smells blood in the water. I have watched this woman measure the distance between a parked car and the curb down to the millimeter, terrorizing families until they hide behind their blinds. But the war really started with my wheelchair ramp. The smell of the fresh lumber was still hanging in the dry heat when she first showed up, 3 weeks after we unpacked, her eyes lighting up as she slapped us with a violation for unauthorized aesthetic modification. And when I tried to explain, showing her my military citation and the medical necessity papers, she just looked at me with dead eyes and said, "We all carry burdens, Lucas, but that doesn't give you the right to lower my property value." That was the moment I knew, right then and there, that this wasn't about rules, it was about power, and what followed was a masterclass in pettiness that would make a high school bully blush. We got hit with a $250 fine because our trash can was visible from the street at 6:05 p.m. when the cutoff was 6 p.m., another $300 because our American flag was apparently too large for the entryway, and Sarah's little garden gnome cost us $150 because it violated the approved ornamentation guidelines. Every single violation came in a thick, cream-colored envelope, smelling of Barbara's overpowering lavender perfume, complete with high-resolution photos, timestamps, and certified delivery receipts, like she was building a RICO case against us instead of complaining about lawn decor. But the real kicker, the thing that made my blood boil, was the selective enforcement, because Mrs. Gable down the street has had a broken-down sedan on blocks in her driveway since Christmas, and the Hendersons paint their garage door a different neon color every month, yet they never get a single letter. It became obvious that Barbara was targeting specific people because my neighbor Hank, another vet, told me the last 3 families in our house, a young Hispanic couple, an elderly black man, and a single mother, were all bullied out within a year. Barbara had a vision for her perfect neighborhood, and it didn't include anyone who didn't look exactly like her, creating a climate of fear where grown men would literally run inside their houses when they saw her coming down the sidewalk. Through all of this, Sarah was terrifyingly calm, just taking the abuse, filing the letters away in her office, scribbling notes in her precise handwriting, and telling me to trust the process, even as I was ready to go pull the ramp down with my bare hands just to make it stop. She started spending late nights in her study, the room filling with stacks of paper, government seals, and the smell of fresh printer ink. And whenever I asked what she was doing, she'd just smile that mysterious, tight-lipped smile and say she was conducting a little research project. The nuclear option dropped 3 months in, when Sarah decided to plant a small vegetable garden in the backyard corner, tomatoes, peppers, basil, simple stuff to help with the grocery bills and give her peace of mind. Barbara struck within 48 hours, delivering a notice claiming our garden violated the Desert Landscape Preservation Clause, slapping us with a threatened $4,200 fine if we didn't rip it out, citing some obscure city ordinance about invasive species and water conservation. I'm sitting there reading this letter, realizing she wants to bankrupt us over tomatoes, while Sarah just reads it, nods once, and says, "Interesting," before grabbing her keys and disappearing for the entire weekend, leaving me to stew in my anger. She came back Monday morning looking exhausted but triumphant, carrying a binder thick enough to stop a bullet, filled with highlighted city codes, zoning maps, and what looked like a dossier on Barbara's entire existence. It turned out, Sarah hadn't just been at the library. She'd been conducting a forensic investigation of the neighborhood, discovering that the ordinance Barbara quoted only applied to commercial lots over 10 acres, meaning our garden was not only legal, it was protected under the Tucson Food Security Act. But Sarah went further. She'd snuck around, legally, of course, and documented that Barbara's own backyard was an environmental crime scene, filled with water-guzzling non-native palms and an illegal fountain running during a drought. When Sarah walked across the street and handed Barbara that first folder of evidence, I watched from the window as the color drained from Barbara's face, transforming her expression from arrogance to pure, unadulterated panic. But Barbara, being the narcissist she is, didn't back down. She doubled down, calling an emergency board meeting to rewrite the rules retroactively, desperate to crush us before we could expose her hypocrisy. That's when things got dirty, really dirty, because Barbara unleashed her brother, Gary, a shady contractor, who showed up with a city inspector who looked about as official as a $3 bill, claiming they had an anonymous tip about our electrical wiring. They tried to frame us, tried to find anything to stick a lien on the house, but they didn't know Sarah was already 5 steps ahead, recording everything, documenting every interaction, every threat, every fake official. The harassment moved online, with Barbara creating a community standards Facebook group, posting photos of our house, dog whistling about new elements ruining the neighborhood character, whipping the local busybodies into a frenzy. It felt like the walls were closing in, like we were drowning in a sea of suburban hate. But Sarah just kept working, her office light burning until 3 a.m., her phone ringing constantly with hushed conversations about subpoenas, affidavits, and federal statutes. One night, Sarah organizes a meeting in our living room, and neighbors start trickling in. Mrs. Chun, Hank, a young couple named Leo and Mike, all of them carrying their own thick folders of violation notices, all of them looking tired, beaten down, and scared. Sarah lays it all out on the dining table, a massive chart connecting dates, fines, and demographics. And that's when it hit me. The pattern was undeniable. 95% of Barbara's fines targeted minorities, veterans, or anyone who didn't fit her traditional mold. "What are you building?" I finally asked her, watching her organize evidence with the precision of a surgeon, and she looked up, her eyes cold and hard as steel, and said, "I'm building a coffin, Lucas, legally speaking, of course." We were about to go to war, and Barbara Miller had no idea she was fighting a nuclear power with a slingshot. The escalation was swift and brutal. Barbara knew she was losing control, so she went for the throat, sending us a final demand letter. Pay the $4,200 immediately, publicly apologize for disrupting community harmony at the next meeting, or face a lien on our home and eventual foreclosure. She wanted us to kneel, to beg, to admit that we were the problem. And the worst part was, financially, we were on the ropes, eating ramen and counting pennies, while she was probably expensing her legal attacks to the HOA budget. The emergency meeting was scheduled for a Thursday at 2 p.m., a time chosen specifically because most working people couldn't attend, ensuring Barbara would have her rubber stamp majority ready to crush us. I walked into that community center feeling like I was walking to my execution, the air stale and smelling of floor wax. Barbara sitting at the head table like a queen on her throne, live streaming the whole thing to her echo chamber on Facebook. "You have 15 minutes to present your defense, Lucas," she said, cutting me off before I could even sit down. Checking her watch with theatrical boredom, I started laying out Sarah's research, the photos of Barbara's own violations, the state laws protecting our garden, but she just waved it away, saying, "Rules are rules, and your pattern of disrespect is well documented." She pushed the apology letter across the table, a humiliating document that was basically a confession to crimes we didn't commit, and demanded I read it into the camera. That's when the doors swung open, and Sarah walked in, not wearing her usual comfortable sweaters, but dressed in a sharp black suit, carrying a heavy leather briefcase, her heels clicking on the linoleum with the rhythm of a ticking time bomb. She didn't say a word, just took a seat in the back row, pulled out a notepad, and started writing, her presence sucking the oxygen out of the room, making Barbara stutter for the first time in her life. After I finished speaking, Sarah stood up, walked to the front, and placed a single, sealed manila envelope on the table in front of Barbara, the sound of the paper hitting the wood echoing like a gunshot. "Before you vote, Mrs. Miller," Sarah said, her voice smooth but dangerous, "I strongly suggest you review the contents of that envelope, specifically the exhibits regarding your history in Nevada." Barbara opened it, her hands trembling, and as she pulled out the documents, her face went ghost white, her eyes widening in genuine, primal fear, realizing that her past, the past she thought she'd buried, had just been dug up and placed on a silver platter. The meeting was abruptly adjourned, Barbara fleeing the room like her hair was on fire, clutching the envelope to her chest, leaving her confused minions behind. That night, her house was lit up like a Christmas tree, frantic phone calls going on until dawn, while Sarah calmly organized the next phase of her plan, telling me that the envelope contained proof of Barbara's previous housing discrimination lawsuits in another state, a pattern of behavior that proved intent. But Barbara wasn't smart enough to quit. She panicked and tried to intimidate witnesses, sending her brother Gary to offer Hank a bribe to sign a statement saying he'd never been discriminated against. What she didn't know was that Hank was recording the entire conversation on his phone, capturing Gary explicitly saying, "My sister wants this military thing to go away. Just take the cash and sign the paper." We had her on bribery, witness tampering, and obstruction, but the coup de grace was yet to come. The following morning, Sarah sat me down at the kitchen table, the morning light hitting her face, and said, "There's something about my job I haven't been able to tell you, Lucas." She opened her portfolio and slid a business card across the table. "The Honorable Sarah Jenkins, Superior Court Judge, Civil Rights Division." My jaw hit the floor. My wife, the woman who clipped coupons and grew tomatoes, was a sitting judge who had spent 15 years ruling on the exact type of discrimination we were facing. She explained that she couldn't use her title to fight Barbara initially because of judicial ethics. She had to build the case as a private citizen, gathering evidence the hard way, ensuring that when the hammer finally dropped, it would be bulletproof. "I've been presiding over cases like this all day, then coming home to live in one," she said, the irony thick enough to cut with a knife. She explained that Barbara had unknowingly trapped herself by threatening a federal judge, even unknowingly, and retaliating against a protected witness. She had committed federal crimes, not just HOA violations. Barbara's final mistake was calling the police on Sarah again, claiming she was impersonating a legal official and terrorizing the community just because Sarah was watering her plants. When Officer Davis arrived, tired of Barbara's nonsense, he found a Superior Court judge in her garden, and Barbara screaming like a banshee about corruption. That police report, documenting Barbara's false reporting and harassment of a judicial officer, was the final nail in the coffin. Sarah had assembled a team of neighbors, collected the evidence, documented the financial fraud where Barbara had embezzled funds to pay for her personal legal defense, and wrapped it all up in a package for the Federal Housing Authority. We weren't just going to get the fine dropped. We were going to dismantle the entire corrupt system Barbara had built. We called for a massive town hall meeting, inviting the news crews, the city council, and every victim Barbara had ever targeted, setting the stage for a public reckoning that would be broadcast live to the entire city. The trap was sprung, The evidence was locked, and Barbara Miller, the suburban dictator, was walking blindly into a buzzsaw of justice, completely unaware that her reign of terror was about to end in spectacular, high-definition fashion. Wednesday evening arrived, and the Oak Creek Community Center was buzzing with an energy that felt less like a neighborhood meeting and more like a courtroom awaiting a high-profile verdict. We're talking 300 people packed into a room meant for half that, news cameras from Channel 4 setting up tripods in the aisles, and the air thick with the scent of cheap coffee and nervous anticipation. Barbara walked in 20 minutes late, looking like a ghost of her former self, flanked by a cheap lawyer who looked like he regretted taking the case the moment he saw the crowd. The testimonials began, and it was devastating. Mrs. Chin spoke about being fined for Lunar New Year decorations while Christmas lights stayed up till March. Leo and Mike showed the emails where Barbara called their lifestyle incompatible with family values. Hank displayed the photos of Barbara measuring his flagpole with a ruler. The crowd groaned, laughed, and shouted in anger as the sheer scale of her pettiness was exposed on giant projector screens. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Sarah stood up, walking to the microphone not as a neighbor, but with the commanding presence of Judge Jenkins. The room fell dead silent. She didn't yell, she didn't scream, she just laid out the facts. The embezzlement of $50,000 in community funds, the systematic violation of the Fair Housing Act, the witness tampering, the bribery. Mrs. Miller, Sarah said, looking directly into the camera lens, discrimination is not a management style, it is a federal crime. Barbara's lawyer literally started packing his briefcase while she was still sitting there, realizing his client was radioactive. The standing ovation that followed was deafening, a release of years of pent-up frustration, as Barbara fled the building, shielding her face from the cameras like a criminal doing a perp walk. The fallout was swift and absolute. Within months, Barbara pled guilty to 3 felonies including wire fraud and civil rights violations. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, forced to pay $180,000 in restitution, and banned for life from ever holding a position on any HOA board in the state. Her husband, Richard, filed for divorce and apologized to us personally, handing over hard drives of evidence that sealed her fate. Life in Oak Creek Sanctuary transformed overnight. The new board, led by Mrs. Chun, refunded all the bogus fines, including our $4,200, and actually lowered dues because they weren't spending money on harassment lawsuits. Property values skyrocketed by 20% because, shockingly, people actually want to live in a neighborhood where they aren't being stalked by a deranged tyrant with a tape measure. Sarah and I took the settlement money and started a legal scholarship for underprivileged students fighting housing discrimination, turning Barbara's hate into someone else's future. The community garden is thriving now, a lush green symbol of our victory, where neighbors actually talk to each other instead of hiding behind closed blinds. It's funny, we moved here for peace and quiet, and we had to fight a war to get it. But looking at Sarah now, watching her laugh with Hank and Mrs. Chun by the tomato plants, I realize it was worth every second of stress. We didn't just beat a bully, we saved a community. But here is the question I want to leave you with. Sarah had to hide her identity as a judge to gather evidence ethically, essentially trapping Barbara in her own lies. Some people say that was deceptive, that she should have declared her conflict of interest earlier, while others say it was the only way to expose deep-rooted corruption that the system usually ignores. Was it fair for a judge to play undercover detective to save her neighborhood, or did the ends justify the means? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's argue about justice, revenge, and the power of a quiet woman with a thick binder. And hey, if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare, hit that subscribe button, because we've got a lot more stories to tell. Stay free, everyone.